My name is Evelyn Reed, and for years I believed in the sanctity of corporate ethics. I was a compliance officer at Aegis Solutions, a name that ironically promised protection, integrity, and unwavering principles. When I first joined, the gleaming glass towers of our headquarters in downtown Financial District felt like a beacon of ambition and possibility. I was fresh out of my advanced degree, brimming with idealism, ready to ensure that Aegis operated not just profitably, but righteously. My office, a modest space overlooking the bustling city streets, was my sanctuary, where I meticulously reviewed policies, audited procedures, and trained employees on the importance of ethical conduct. I genuinely believed I was a guardian of fairness, a silent sentinel against the creeping shadows of corporate malfeasance. The initial months were a blur of learning, adapting, and feeling an immense sense of purpose. I streamlined reporting processes, updated our code of conduct, and even launched a new internal training module on anti-bribery regulations. I genuinely believed I was a guardian of fairness, a silent sentinel against the creeping shadows of corporate malfeasance. The initial months were a blur of learning, adapting, and feeling an immense sense of purpose. I streamlined reporting processes, updated our code of conduct, and even launched a new internal training module on anti-bribery regulations. My direct superior, Sarah Jenkins, the head of compliance, was a pragmatic woman, older, with a weary wisdom in her eyes that I initially mistook for experience. She praised my diligence, my thoroughness. "Evelyn," she'd say, "you're a breath of fresh air. We need more people like you, truly committed to doing things by the book." Her words, then, felt like validation. In hindsight, they were a subtle warning I failed to heed. The first tremor in my perfectly ordered world came in the form of an expense report. It was a minor anomaly, a series of lavish dinners and client entertainment expenses filed by Arthur Vance, our charismatic, silver-tongued vice president of global sales. On paper, Vance was a titan, bringing in massive deals, always impeccably dressed, with a smile that could charm the paint off a wall. But the expenses seemed excessive, even for a VP. Multiple dinners with the same client representative from a small, unheard-of shell company, always in high-end restaurants, always with an absurdly high tab. I flagged it to Sarah, expecting a quick resolution. "Arthur is a rainmaker, Evelyn," Sarah had said, her voice a little too dismissive. "He brings in the big bucks. Sometimes you have to grease the wheels to keep the revenue flowing. Just sign off on it. It's not worth the fuss." My gut churned. "But Sarah, the policy is clear. Client entertainment must be proportionate. And this company, I can't find any significant dealings with them. It looks like a potential kickback scheme." Sarah's eyes narrowed, a flicker of irritation replacing her usual calm. "Evelyn, you're new. You don't understand how things work at this level. There are nuances. Just approve it, or I will." That was my first real dose of corporate cynicism. I approved it, but the unease lingered. I made a mental note, a tiny crack forming in my idealistic veneer. I started keeping a private log, a simple spreadsheet on my personal laptop at home, detailing such instances, just in case. A nascent instinct, a whisper of caution, told me to trust my own judgment, not the weary pragmatism of my superior. Over the next few months, the nuances became a torrent. I uncovered a pattern of inflated invoices from a particular vendor, Phoenix Innovations, a company that seemed to exist solely to provide services to Aegis at exorbitant rates. The services themselves were vague, often described as consulting or strategic advisory. When I dug deeper, I found Phoenix Innovations was registered to a P.O. box, and its listed director shared a surname with the CEO's administrative assistant. The threads were starting to weave into a tapestry of blatant corruption. I compiled a comprehensive report detailing the discrepancies, cross-referencing bank statements, and even pulling public records on Phoenix Innovations. I presented it to Sarah, confident that this undeniable evidence would spark an internal investigation. Instead, I was met with a wall of ice. Evelyn, this is highly speculative, Sarah said, tapping the thick binder on her desk. You're accusing senior management, perhaps even the CEO, based on what? Coincidences? A shared surname? Her voice was low, but her eyes were sharp, almost threatening. Do you have any idea the kind of waves you're trying to make? This could jeopardize your career, our careers. But the evidence, Sarah, I pleaded, my voice trembling slightly. It's all here. The inflated invoices, the lack of verifiable services, the connection to the CEO's office. This isn't speculation. It's a systemic abuse of company funds. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Listen to me, Evelyn. You pull this thread, you unravel everything. People at the top don't like to be questioned. You'll be out, and I'll be left to clean up your mess. Drop it. Forget you ever saw any of this. The air in her office grew heavy, suffocating. I felt a cold dread seep into my bones. This wasn't just dismissal, it was a veiled threat. The sanctuary of my office now felt like a cage. That night, I didn't sleep. I replayed Sarah's words, her expression. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Aegis Solutions was not the ethical beacon I had imagined. It was a ship rotting from the inside, and those at the helm were actively steering it into deeper, murkier waters. This was the moment my secret dossier truly began. The spreadsheet on my personal laptop transformed into a meticulous, encrypted repository. I started working late, long after everyone else had left, copying files, scanning documents, taking discrete photographs of physical records that I couldn't otherwise access. Every late night, fueled by lukewarm coffee and a growing sense of righteous fury, I felt like a spy in my own company. My heart would pound in my chest every time I heard a distant elevator ding or footsteps in the hallway. The fear was constant, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was overshadowed by a burning indignation. How could they betray the trust of their employees, their shareholders, their clients? How could they make a mockery of the very principles I was hired to uphold? I learned to be subtle. I'd schedule routine audits that conveniently allowed me access to departments involved in the suspicious transactions. I'd ask seemingly innocuous questions, piecing together fragments of information from unsuspecting colleagues. I found others who were quietly uncomfortable, whispers of things not being right, but no one dared to speak up. They had families, mortgages, careers to protect. I understood their fear, but it only strengthened my resolve. Someone had to fight. My target became clear: Arthur Vance and anyone else directly benefiting or enabling this corruption, especially those at the highest echelons. Vance, with his slick charm and predatory smile, was a master manipulator. I started observing his interactions, noting how he'd subtly pressure subordinates to cut corners, how he'd dismiss ethical concerns with a wave of his hand and a dismissive laugh. I even managed to record a few discreet conversations where he alluded to special arrangements and favors for certain clients, all while maintaining a veneer of corporate jargon. The recordings were grainy, sometimes muffled, but the intent was clear. The pressure intensified. Sarah started assigning me to trivial tasks, trying to bury me in paperwork, keeping me away from anything significant. She'd scrutinize my work, looking for any excuse to discredit me. Evelyn, your report on interdepartmental communication protocols is lacking detail, she'd say, her tone condescending. Perhaps you need to focus more on your assigned duties and less on extracurricular activities. It was a thinly veiled warning. I felt like I was walking on eggshells, every step a potential misstep that could expose me. My once vibrant social life dwindled. Friends noticed I was withdrawn, perpetually stressed. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world, Evelyn," my best friend Chloe remarked one evening. I just forced a smile and mumbled about work pressure. How could I explain that I was secretly waging war against my employer, a war that could cost me everything? The paranoia became a constant companion. I started double-checking my car doors, looking over my shoulder, convinced I was being watched. I encrypted my personal computer with layers of passwords and backed up my dossier to multiple secure cloud drives, just in case. I felt utterly alone, but also strangely empowered. Every piece of evidence I gathered, every late-night hour I spent meticulously organizing my files, felt like a small victory. This wasn't just about exposing corruption anymore. It was personal. They had tried to silence me, intimidate me, make me complicit. They had underestimated me. One evening, after another tense exchange with Sarah, where she effectively threatened to put me on a performance improvement plan, I decided I had enough. The fear was still there, but it was now laced with an unshakable resolve. I knew I couldn't fight them from within. I needed to go outside. But who? The regulatory bodies were often slow, bureaucratic, and sometimes susceptible to corporate influence. I needed something decisive, something that would cause an undeniable seismic shock. I started researching whistleblower protections, legal precedents, and investigative journalism outlets. I spent weeks meticulously refining my dossier, cross-referencing every claim, ensuring every piece of evidence was unimpeachable. It included detailed financial statements showing the inflated invoices from Phoenix Innovations, complete with bank transfer records. Internal emails from Arthur Vance subtly coercing employees to manipulate sales figures and overlook compliance issues. Photographs of physical documents I couldn't copy directly. My own recorded conversations, carefully edited to highlight the critical admissions and threats. A comprehensive timeline of my attempts to report internally and the subsequent stonewalling and retaliation. This wasn't just a collection of files, it was a narrative, a story of betrayal and deceit meticulously constructed to be irrefutable. I named it Project Aegis Unveiled. The hardest part was choosing who to trust. After much deliberation, I decided against a direct regulatory report first. I needed public exposure, a spotlight so bright it would force action. I reached out to a renowned investigative journalist, Marcus Thorne, known for his fearless exposés of corporate corruption. I used an anonymous email, detailing only enough to pique his interest without revealing my identity or the full scope of my findings. His reply came swiftly, a single line. Intriguing. Let's talk. Secure line only. The meeting was clandestine, held in a quiet, unassuming coffee shop far from my usual haunts. I wore a hat and sunglasses, a theatrical touch that felt necessary given the gravity of the situation. Marcus was exactly as I imagined. Sharp eyes, a perpetually curious expression, and an aura of quiet intensity. I laid out a fraction of my evidence, enough to demonstrate the scale of the malfeasance. I watched his face as he reviewed the initial documents, his eyebrows rising steadily. "This is big, Evelyn," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. "Potentially massive. But you realize the risks, don't you? Your career, your reputation, everything." "I know," I replied, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "But I can't live with myself if I let this continue. Aegis Solutions is a fraud, and they tried to break me for pointing it out." I spent the next few months working closely with Marcus, providing him with access to the full dossier, explaining the intricate web of deceit. He brought in his own forensic accountants and legal experts to verify every single claim. The process was agonizingly slow, each day a fresh torment of waiting, wondering if I would be discovered. I continued my work at Aegis, playing the part of the diligently compliant, if slightly subdued, compliance officer. Sarah's disdain for me was palpable, a constant reminder of the sword hanging over my head. Arthur Vance continued to parade his charm, oblivious to the storm brewing. The day the exposé broke was surreal. It was a Tuesday morning. I arrived at the office, heart pounding, trying to act normal. My phone vibrated non-stop with notifications from news outlets. Marcus had gone live. The headline screamed, "Aegis Solutions, a house of cards built on fraud." VP of Sales Arthur Vance implicated in multi-million-dollar kickback scheme. Compliance officer's secret dossier unmasks corporate deceit. The moment I saw my name, Evelyn Reed, proudly displayed as the whistleblower, a wave of relief, fear, and exhilaration washed over me. It was done. The truth was out. The office was in pandemonium. People were huddled around computer screens, whispering, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. Sarah Jenkins looked like she'd seen a ghost, her face ashen, her usual composure shattered. Arthur Vance was nowhere to be seen. The CEO's office door was shut, a flurry of activity behind it. Within hours, federal investigators swarmed the building, their presence an undeniable declaration of the gravity of the situation. They went straight for Arthur Vance's office, then the CEO's. Sarah Jenkins was immediately suspended, escorted out by security. The sheer scale of the operation, the swiftness of the response, was a testament to the undeniable evidence I had painstakingly collected. I was immediately called in by the investigators. I walked into the conference room, dossier in hand, feeling a strange calm. My fear had dissipated, replaced by a quiet sense of triumph. I spent the next several days giving my testimony, detailing every single transgression, every attempt to silence me. I watched as the empire of lies crumbled. Arthur Vance was arrested that very afternoon. The CEO, initially defiant, eventually resigned under immense pressure, facing a slew of legal challenges. Many others implicated in the scandal either fled or were promptly fired and faced their own legal battles. Aegis Solutions, once a titan, became a symbol of corporate greed and corruption. Its stock plummeted, its reputation in tatters. The company was eventually forced into a massive restructuring, shedding its tainted leadership and vowing a complete overhaul of its ethical practices. My role as a whistleblower came with its own challenges. The initial media frenzy was overwhelming. I was hailed as a hero by some, vilified as a traitor by others. My name was everywhere. But the support I received from Marcus Thorne, the legal team that rallied behind me, and even some former colleagues who found their courage after the truth emerged, was immense. The personal cost was significant. I couldn't return to Aegis, not that I would have wanted to. My career in corporate compliance, at least in the traditional sense, was over. But I had no regrets. The feeling of vindication, of having stood up for what was right, far outweighed any professional setback. I had faced down a corporate beast, alone, and brought it to its knees. Today, I work as a consultant, specializing in corporate ethics and whistleblower protection. I help others navigate the treacherous waters I once sailed alone. My secret dossier, once a source of terror and determination, now sits in a secure vault, a testament to a battle won. It serves as a constant reminder that integrity, even in the darkest corners of the corporate world, can indeed prevail. And sometimes, the quietest voices can cause the loudest explosions. My name is Evelyn Reed, and I brought down my own company to save its soul. And in doing so, I saved a piece of my own.